I'm a professor here at the law school. 50 years ago, I was in the military on my way to Vietnam. We've assembled an expert panel today on an important and unfortunately timely topic. Before we get started substantively, I want to thank Chris Monty, Spencer Cope, Janelle White, Shelby Jarman, and Melinda Rogers for event planning and media coverage, and our students Amanda Henson and Matt McKean for really being responsible for the idea and the planning of this event this afternoon. We're thrilled that we have such a large group. Let me quickly introduce the panel members, and then we'll get started, and we'll put it at quarter after. We have to turn the room over. On my far left is Dr. Craig Bryan, and he is the head of the National Center for Veterans Studies here on the campus. He's an award-winning therapist for military suicide and PTSD therapy. Next to me is Quinney College. She is a student. She's written an amazing paper on PTSD and how it can affect veterans. On my far right is Judge Royal Hanson, who is the presiding judge of the 3rd District Court. And for our purposes, he's the head of the 3rd District Court Veterans Court. And next to me is John Baxter, Judge John Baxter, who's the head of the Salt Lake Veterans Court. So we're lucky to have such an expert panel. I'm going to ask Craig to start and set the table for us. Will you tell us what PTSD is and how it affects veterans?
Sure. So kind of a really simple way of thinking about what PTSD is the notion of stalled recovery. And what I mean by stalled recovery is that if any of us experience or are exposed to a highly stressful situation, life-threatening situation, or other horrific experience, most of us will actually respond with what we call symptoms of PTSD. We'll all lose some sleep, we'll all be anxious, we'll be looking over our shoulders, some dreams and unwanted memories of the experience. We'll maybe not want to spend as much time with other people, and we'd stay away from things that remind us of the event. This is hardwired into us. It is a natural biological survival reaction. And in essence, what our brain is trying to do is say, hey, don't forget this very life-threatening situation that almost killed you or that was very horrific, and it sort of burns this into our brains, and so naturally we try to stay away from those types of situations. Now, for most of us, about 90% of us, after an experience like this, we will then kind of proceed through a natural recovery process. And this has been well documented in many research studies showing that in the weeks following exposure to a traumatic event, symptoms of PTSD naturally resolve. We all kind of return to our baseline. Then about 10% of individuals exposed to trauma get stuck. They do not experience our natural built-in recovery process. And this leads to changes at the neural level. It changes brain functioning, changes behavior, changes a lot of physical systems as well within us. And this is why many of us who work with traumatized individuals will often say it's like, in essence, you're stuck, and you have stuck points. And what we have to do then from a treatment perspective is kickstart. is kickstart the natural recovery process to help individuals to basically go through what would otherwise be a natural recovery process. And we can do this through a variety of therapeutic interventions.
And then how does it affect veterans?
Yeah, so PTSD is the most frequently diagnosed psychological health condition amongst service members and veterans. I think one of the things to keep in mind about PTSD is that it can come from a variety of sources. When it comes to military personnel and veterans, we traditionally think of combat exposure, but it's also very common to experience PTSD after sexual assault, as well as other non-combat related trauma, motor vehicle accidents. We do a lot of people in our center who've experienced mishaps, so helicopter crashes, training accidents, things like that. We also know that there are some gender differences within the military. So the military is about 85% male. The primary source of trauma for male service members is combat. Women make up about 15% of the military. The primary source of PTSD or the primary trauma is sexual assault. And so we see some significant gender differences there. The other interesting fact about PTSD is that even amongst military personnel and veterans, regardless of gender, male or female, when we look at sort of the most pernicious or the strongest predictors of PTSD, it's sexual assault. And so if a service member has been in combat and they've been assaulted, what we tend to find is that the sexual assault is the trauma that's actually most strongly and closely correlated with their manifestation of PTSD. And then the last thing I'll note is we actually have many service members and veterans as well who have suffered childhood abuse. And so one of the things that we find in our research is that a lot of service members, veterans come in with combat PTSD or perhaps sexually based PTSD. And a lot of them have also experienced neglect, physical as well as sexual abuse as children. And all of these things are critical to remember so we don't necessarily make the assumption that a service member or veteran, if they're having certain problems, it's directly tied to one particular experience that they've had in their lives.
Thank you. John, what is a veterans court and why do we have it?
Well, Veterans Court's self-defining. I mean, I'll talk about what qualifies a person to come into the Salt Lake City Justice Court's Veterans Court. You have to have a case that is post-adjudication. It's not waiting for any further hearings other than reviews in Veterans Court. You have to be eligible to receive and willing to receive services at the Veterans Administration. And the way that we determine, number one, whether that individual is eligible to receive first self-report, and secondly, we have what is called a VJO, and the VJOs work through Judge Hanson's court as well, Veterans Justice Outreach Coordinators. They are VA social workers who are our information conduit and sort of treatment coordinators, an access point, if you will, at the VA. The VA has a philosophy, any point of access. If you're going in for dentistry and that's your first contact with the VA, and if you need other help, they'll try and link you through that. What happens is for those individuals who self-identify as being eligible to receive those services, and with the agreement of the defense attorneys and prosecutors, we bring them into Veterans Court on a review basis. Now, Judge Hanson's court is a much more classic problem-solving court with phases and that sort of thing. It requires certification by the administrative office courts, the state entity that supervises and keeps track of courts. The Salt Lake City Justice Court is more a probation supervision court. What we do to give vets credit, if you will, for participation is either stay or put on hold any financial penalties in the beginning or forgive them over time. We do track their participation in treatment, participation in other outreaches to the VA, like housing and so on through the VA. The staff at my court, and very much the same with Judge Hanson's court, will include that VJO We have Department of Workforce Services, a gentleman named Ray Spray, who's a disabled vet himself, and works for Department of Workforce Services, and his mission is to assist disabled vets. And any other kind of staff that we can identify that may be helpful to assist vets in the whole array of services they need, from homelessness to PTSD treatment to substance abuse treatment and so on.
Royal, what kinds of cases do you supervise in the 3rd District Veterans Court?
Let's see, the common denominator for cases that we handle are felony cases. So it needs to be a felony that's here. Many of our drug courts who are also specialty treatment courts will exclude domestic violence, they'll exclude felony DUIs, in other cases of assaults and these. We've made the decision that we're willing to take those cases regardless of, as long as there's not a adverse consequences to the court. So we've really reached out and extended the hand to veterans to have them come in. We have a screening process. It's engaged in by the VJO, by the Legal Defender's Office, as well as the Prosecutor's Office here. It's a great program, and I want you to know that it's one of the terrific innovations that's taken place here in the court system in the last couple of decades. So it was, first court was formed back in 2008. It was back in Buffalo, New York, and that's where the model developed. It really is a model based upon 10 key components which are related to the drug court and mental health court. But we've got a little different situation here in our courts in the sense that we have the Veterans Administration and the services that are available from the Veterans Administration. We have VJOs that are there as licensed therapists that perform a great service. We have Salt Lake County as a partner who's also providing case management. We have the District Attorney, the Legal Defenders Association. We have Ray Spray, who also works with Judge Baxter's court. And we have AP&P, who's there for all of our veterans that are on paper, that are out on parole or probation, that are eligible for the program. And we have compliance officers from the Sheriff's Office. So we've got a terrific team that's there, that's helpful. And you should know that Judge Warner, who's over the magistrate judge in the federal court, Judge Baxter are really responsible for starting these courts here in the state of Utah. And we owe a great debt of gratitude to what Judge Baxter's done. One of our highlights was having Judge Baxter come and speak at the graduation for our veterans. And he's a veteran himself. He knows what he's talking about. And I appreciate the good advice and counsel and direction that Judge Baxter provided for our court. Thank you.
Thank you. Cody, will you tell us about your paper?
Yes. So for my note for the law review last year, I did some research surrounding, I guess I should back up. I started my research wondering what it was that was preventing service members from seeking help for mental health issues from the VA. I am the spouse of a service member, and we have a lot of friends who are former service members, and they all expressed a fear that seeking help from the VA would result in a loss of their ability to possess firearms. I was not really sure that that was actually a real thing that was happening, so I did some research on the subject and found that the VA takes a different reporting, uses a different reporting method than what is required by federal law, which is to report based upon an individual's prior adjudication, specifically for this instance as a mental defective or someone who's been committed to a mental institution. The VA takes a different look at that and instead bases their determination on whether an individual has the capacity to contract or manage his or her financial affairs. So what happens is the VA meets with a service member for any different type of issue that they may be experiencing. A VA ratings representative discusses different scenarios with the service member, asks them questions about their ability to manage their finances, and in turn reports them to the Department of Justice as someone who is prohibited from possessing a firearm based upon their finding that they are mentally incompetent to handle their finances, not the same types of things that federal law requires.
So this is a type of discrimination that is not found otherwise in the population.
It is, and there are other people who have written more on that subject, on the constitutionality of this type of thing. My concern is more that it prevents veterans from seeking help from the VA because they're afraid that going to seek this help is going to put them in a situation where they lose the tools that they have needed to survive in the environments that they've been in.
Does the VA, is it aware of this discrimination in this policy, and is it trying to change the policy?
It's not trying to change the policy. It is aware of the policy, and that's why I think that it's important for people to understand what's happening and reach out to their Congress people to try and pass legislation that makes the VA comply with federal law. And the reason for that is 98% of the records that are reported to the NICS from federal agencies come from the VA and are veteran records. There's only 2% coming from any other federal agencies, and those are from the Department of Justice.
Craig, will you explain your award-winning 12-session PTSD therapy program?
Sure. So there are only a handful of treatments that are considered empirically supported or scientifically supported for the treatment of PTSD. And the most effective ones that are endorsed by VA, Department of Defense, Institute of Medicine, international bodies as well in the UK and Australia, all around the world. There are two. The first is called prolonged exposure. The second is called cognitive processing therapy, or CPT. And the second therapy is the treatment that we specialize in, the one that we use here at the University of Utah in our center. Both of these treatments are psychotherapies or non-medication treatments. The one that we use is really built off of that notion of what PTSD is that I was describing to you before, that notion of stalled recovery, of being stuck. And in the treatment, what we do is we, in essence, say it's not the event itself that's the problem. It's what you tell yourself about the event that's the problem. It's what you tell yourself about yourself and the meaning that you ascribe to the event that's getting in the way of life. And so we see many service members and veterans they believe things like it's not safe, the world is a dangerous place, you can't trust others, but also see a lot of guilt and shame and self-blame. It's my fault, I should have done things differently, I'm not a good person, I've done bad things, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken, on and on and on. And what we do in the therapy is we identify these thought processes, we've cleverly called them stuck points. And once we identify these perspectives, we teach the service member or the veteran how to evaluate their beliefs. And I've even used the expression, let's put your beliefs on trial. Do we have evidence supporting your belief? Do we have evidence against it? What are you basing this on? Oh, you're basing it off of emotions, not based on facts. And as we help them to examine and evaluate these thoughts and these beliefs that they have, we then suggest, well, maybe if this is not an accurate or a balanced or a helpful way of understanding yourself in the world, perhaps there's a different way of understanding what's happened to you and who you are. And as we change how we think about things, as we adopt a new perspective, what we tend to see is the symptoms of PTSD very rapidly reduce. The anxiety starts to resolve, the self-blame and the guilt disappears, nightmares start to dissipate, they start engaging in relationships, social activities, they leave their home, they do things that they enjoy, so on and so forth. The interesting thing is this treatment was actually developed something like 30, 40 years ago. It's been very well researched. Study after study after study finds that these treatments are highly effective. The problem that we face in our society is that very, very few mental health professionals are trained to do these therapies. And so we looked at published research several years ago showing that on average, a typical veteran, if a veteran has PTSD and they go somewhere in the community outside of the VA, they have a less than 5% chance of finding a licensed mental health professional that knows how to do the therapy and will actually do it. What's stunning is even surveys of mental health professionals show that it's like only a third of those who have been trained to do it will actually do the therapy, because the clinicians have misconceptions about trauma, about working with veterans. This is part of the reason why, I'm actually a big advocate for VA services. The VA has pushed these out. If you're a veteran, you have an astronomically higher likelihood of finding a mental health clinician who knows how to treat PTSD in the VA than you do here in Salt Lake City. It's quite disturbing when we've heard a lot of the service members and veterans who come to us for help, the types of treatment they've received, the things that they've been told by their therapists, that are actually harmful. And so by the time they get to us 7 or 8 years later, they're hopeless, they're suicidal, they've already tried to kill themselves multiple times, and they're kind of on making their last stand in that sense. And so it's something that I think it's really important, and part of the reason why we've implemented the treatment here in Utah is because there are actually only 4 licensed psychologists in the state of Utah outside the VA who are trained to do this therapy, and 3 of them work here at the University of Utah. And there's only a handful. We're training social workers as well here at the university to increase the labor force of qualified clinicians who can help service members and veterans in need.
John, how does the court and the services that you assemble, how does that affect a veteran, who's one of the defendants in your court?
I think that primarily we serve to support that veteran in their treatment process. I don't question the treatment process. I believe that I can understand, as a psychology undergraduate, I can read an assessment, understand what it means, but I'm not professionally qualified to question it or decide whether it's valid. My primary function is to support that individual in whatever it is that they need help with, and I tell even our graduates as they leave, if you need something, come and find me. If I can help you, I will. If I can't help you, I'll try and find somebody who can help. Give them that kind of support. Some discussion about trust here. One of the things that we have coming into this situation is the mistrust that veterans feel, not only for treatment providers, but also for people like judges. In the military, for those of you who've been in the military, there's kind of a built-in inherent mistrust between officers and enlisted people. It's part of what makes it work, and it's part of what makes it dysfunctional at the same time. Enlisted people trust officers who lead well, who don't get them harmed unnecessarily, who show the insight and so on to be able to achieve missions without doing stupid things. Otherwise, enlisted people I'm an enlisted guy, okay? Otherwise, they mistrust. There's nothing so much in the world like, the civilian world, like a judge that smells and looks like an officer, okay? So, part of my job, and I guess Royal goes through the same thing, is to engage the individual vets in that process of trust building.
And having heard about therapeutic interventions, I hear about these things, but I don't have a lot of detail on them. And I don't bring a lot of that up in court because I don't want to create a treatment situation or set treatment back by asking the wrong questions. So I mostly receive information and respond back to that. But part of that is through that support process to engage them in ways that they begin to trust that I don't have a dog in this hunt. This isn't John Baxter's Veterans Court, okay? This is Salt Lake City Justice Court's Veterans Court. For those of you who are unfortunate enough to be before me charged with a crime and have PTSD and whatever variety of other symptoms you may have. So I see my function and the way that I affect them primarily to help them begin to trust and engage. And you can watch over time, the symptoms begin to, I don't know what the technical term is, decrease, remit, go down. Watch the more positive behaviors increase over time. There's less of the hypervigilance. We have guys who sit back in the corner by themselves, back in the corner. They don't want anybody behind them. To watch them beginning come up to the microphone and stand there. They don't shake. These are brave people. They're tough people. They're damned unhappy to be there, I can promise you that. To watch that over a year's time, longer sometimes in the kind of jurisdiction that Royal has, to watch those things begin to go away, to watch them begin to trust, to watch them begin to laugh and kid with the other vets, to watch them pick up their service animals and begin to interact with those support vehicles. And it's my pleasure to at least engage in a process where if I'm doing anything, I'm helping to let that vet know that I'm here, I've got your back. I'm not your buddy, I'm your judge, but I've got your back.
Thank you. Well, will you share with us a story about a memorable defendant that sticks out in your mind?
Let's see, that's a interesting proposition, and let me tell you one that we have had some significant success with. In the VA, we treat PTSD locally on an outpatient basis at our Veterans Administration Hospital. And also in Sheridan, Wyoming, there is a specific location for treating PTSD. And we have referred veterans up to the Wyoming facility, and that's one that we have had some significant success at doing. We've had an individual, I have to admit that this individual was part of my drug court when I started a drug court out in West Jordan. We had a drug court when I started the Veterans Treatment Court here in the 3rd District Court in Salt Lake. He was also appearing for that. So following up, this is a 9-year period that we're looking at. And one of the referrals that I've made is for him to go to Sheridan, where it's an inpatient specialized treatment for PTSD. I'd be interested in Dr. Bryan and the input that he has on the effectiveness of those, but it has been very effective here. We've been able to change directions, change lives, and the process that we're engaged in is really one where we get to see individuals whose Judge Baxter has described that have turned a corner and they've made some significant changes in their life. They've been able to treat and get assistance with regard to substance abuse programs, with regard to mental health issues, with regard to traumatic brain injuries, and these are deserving individuals that it's a pleasure to work with, people that are talented, competent, that you can trust with your life. And the one individual I'm thinking of has gone through on a period of at least 10 years now and been successful with the significant PTSD. And the reason is that he's been able to follow through and do what we've asked him to do in therapy and obtain employment work and be successful. So we have a phrase in our court that we encourage our team to keep in their lanes. So just like Judge Baxter talked about, I don't second guess the treatment recommendations that are made to me, and I don't second guess the case manager's recommendations, but it's one where we work as a team to each perform our function that we're engaged in.
Thank you. The law school has a Student Veterans Association, and it's not limited to just student veterans, although all student veterans are welcome to participate. And I'm going to ask Cody to talk about the SVA in a second. But we are really pleased to have in all of our classes student veterans. And the 1L class this year has 7 of them. Will those of you who are here who are student veterans at the law school just raise your hand? Thank you. Thank you for your service. We're really honored to have that kind of diversity to share with other students. So, Cody, will you talk about the SVA and what it does, and besides having an annual function like this?
Well, I think that Nat is probably a better person to talk about the SVA than I am, but it's just an organization for students who are interested in serving veterans through the law. We meet, quarterly? And participate in Veterans Day celebrations. We assist, a lot of us assist at the Veterans Legal Clinic up at the VA. I believe that's the second Thursday of each month. And we just try to be a resource for other students who are interested in helping veterans and for veterans who need assistance. Personally, I joined the SVA in hopes that I could use my legal education in a way that would further veterans' issues and help to resolve some of the conflicts that friends of my family experience as non-veteran myself.
Let me throw it open to you.
Let me ask one
Okay,
question, Professor Holbrook, and that is an invitation to all of you, and I think Judge Baxter will join in. We have Veterans Treatment Court every Thursday in our court up on the 4th floor of the Mathis Courthouse. You have a standing invitation to come and see what happens and how veterans are progressing and the significant things that they can accomplish through Veterans Treatment Court. I know Judge Baxter has that same opportunity for you to come to the Salt Lake Justice Court, Veterans Court. The other thing I would suggest, and would be interested in having Joe Lynn look at this, but the court would certainly be interested in having student insurance come and participate in the Veterans Treatment Court on a semester basis. It's something where you could make a meaningful contribution and be engaged in legal research and writing, as well as seeing what happens with regard to the treatment and care and concern with our veterans. So we simply extend that invitation.
We'll see if we can create an internship, a formal internship in that regard. What I'd like to do with the remaining time would be turn this over to you and let you ask questions either of the panel generically or address a specific question to a specific panelist. So, anybody? Yes.
I'm not sure if you addressed this or not, but when you were talking about the void, apparently, with very specific treatment training for your clinicians, that seems like a really reasonable target for mitigation. What are you doing to make that more robust and avail that training to people and overcome that hurdle that people have or the aversion that they have with deploying the tools that they apparently have?
Yeah, great question. It's a question that we've been actually working on at the state level here as well as nationally. So here the National Center for Veteran Studies, we actually have a training institute, and different groups and organizations will, hire us to do different trainings focused on usually suicide prevention, but I'm also a certified trainer in the trauma therapy. Where we run into the biggest problem is that, agencies, policymakers, government officials, I don't think fully appreciate how much training is involved to get a clinician to be really good at this. And, the model that has long been used in the mental health field is workshops with PowerPoint presentations, which is utterly useless. And to put this in perspective, because sometimes people don't like what I have to say, because workshops are great, we get to check the box and we get to feel warm and fuzzy about it. It doesn't change behavior. And to put this into perspective, I say, let's imagine going into surgery. You're about to go under, and your surgeon comes up and says, I've never actually been supervised in this procedure before, but I have my PowerPoint slides printed up. And we would never allow that in most medical disciplines, but in mental health, that's how we train. And part of the reason for that is because within the mental health disciplines at the training level, at the university level, there is not, unfortunately, a national commitment to evidence-based practice. And so there are still, when I do training workshops, I'm stunned at the hostility that I will receive, because I'm advocating a procedure that has 40 years of scientific evidence backing it up versus this is just the opinion that you have and that's what your guru taught you at graduate school. You can see I've become increasingly cynical about this. And the reason for that, to be perfectly blunt, is because I'm tired of service members and veterans dying. This is a life and death situation. I'm sick and tired of trained professionals just washing that away and saying science doesn't matter. Because our friends and our family members are dying as a result of that. And we don't tolerate it in any other discipline. And a part of that, then, the challenge is that for these trauma therapies, it's not only going through intensive training, but months of supervision. And so, I'm constantly asked, and I do these trainings where I'll meet with clinicians every single week and we review their cases and I give them feedback. I say, you're doing it wrong. It's like your patient's not getting better because you're doing it wrong. And you need to do it this other way instead. And it's, and so I think in order to get to that point, to be perfectly honest, we have to fundamentally overhaul the education system, which is a Herculean task. And it's going to take the involvement of accreditation bodies, of universities, as well as licensing boards. And I don't know that we have enough groundswell to make that happen right now. But I'm always encouraged, about 150 years ago, the medical community did this. In the late 19th century, medicine underwent a massive shift towards evidence-based practice, and schools that were not teaching physicians to use scientifically supported ideas went out of business. And I'm hoping that there'll be a public effort on the mental health side to do the same.
Just as a follow-up, will you share with the audience the grant that you received from the Boeing Corporation?
Yeah, thanks. So the NCVS, we just received a 3-year grant from Boeing to do trainings. So we'll not only increase the number of veterans we can provide therapy to, but as a part of that, Boeing has asked us will train the clinicians as a part of the treatment so that we can increase the labor pool and go around the country and start teaching people how to do this and providing ongoing consultation. And so we've been asked to train 1,000 mental health professionals over the next 3 years. And here on campus up in our very nice new facilities, you should come and visit us up in the Gardner Commons. We now have space where we have graduate students in both psychology and social work who are learning how to do these therapies under our supervision. And those who have, if you ask our students, they'll say it's not always easy because we're picky, we're brutal with the feedback, and but we very rapidly get them to a point and where they're doing these treatments very effectively, and you can see it. You see it in the outcomes, and so we'll be able to scale that up because of Boeing.
Another question, please. Yes?
Yeah, what advice do you have for employers seeking, wanting to employ more veterans, both pitfalls to avoid and maybe more proactive steps that you can take to, I don't necessarily want to say be more accommodating, but just be more mindful of things to do?
I know that a number of businesses have a commitment to hire veterans. And locally, Zions Bank, for example, has a very robust veterans recruitment and training program to get veterans into the banking profession. Does somebody
I'll
else?
speak a little, I think one of the barriers that you've got is that there are so few of us veterans that people don't understand the issues that veterans may have. A good many veterans don't have PTSD. A good many veterans did their time, they came out, they're looking for work. There may be a little bit of a level of paranoia on the part of employers to hire. I mean, the news of the past couple of days, if I were now a 28-year-old Marine combat veteran, I would hope that I wasn't on a hiring list, because that'd be one more thing to get me checked off of. As the lawyer looks to his loss prevention officer to say, should I hire this guy or should I hire this person who's not a veteran? So it's once again a tremendous education effort on the part of veterans and veterans organizations to let employers know that veterans, not only are they not a threat of harm in the workplace, but they've also been trained to work hard, follow orders, and all the kind of good stuff that employers look for. Talking to follow orders on the enlisted side, on the officer side, trained in leadership, they've led people, they've led projects, they've done those kinds of things. So you've got somebody who may not only have an MBA or a JD, but they've also been in positions where they've had to make decisions for large organizations, battalion-sized organizations. Again, though, I think it goes back to educating potential employers what a benefit it would be to them to hire them.
Yeah, in that regard, I wanted to thank Nat McKean because it was his idea to have this program on PTSD, and it turned out that it's just incredibly timely given the Thousand Oaks situation.
Go ahead.
I was going to add the point I think is, so there was a study published 2 years ago that actually they surveyed corporate leaders, and what they found was overwhelming, like 90%. We want to hire veterans, and but also the majority of them were worried about veterans having PTSD. And so there's a stereotype, and this is, as a veteran myself, it's like one of my crazy makers, especially when I talk with journalists and the media. I'm like the broken veteran stereotype, or the angry veteran stereotype, that I think is very harmful. And so, again, with like the shooting in Thousand Oaks, what we do not hear about is 85-90% of veterans do not have PTSD. 99% of veterans do not go on shooting rampages. But we haven't, I don't think we're talking about a lot of these issues in the right way.
Well, and then just personally, I served in combat. I had guilt-based PTSD. I've gone through your therapy program. And my PTSD has not affected my ability to be a productive attorney, for example. It's just something I live with. So.
Let me say one other thing too, Jim, is that one of the integral parts of our veterans treatment courts is having veteran mentors. And unlike a drug court, unlike a mental health court, we have a select group of veterans that are there every week that are providing counsel and insight to our veterans. And it's done on a volunteer basis, number one. And secondly, it's not reported to the court. So if you've got an issue or a challenge, there's a veteran that's going to really stand as a buffer there. And I'd encourage you to advise any veterans that you're aware of that may be in a position to serve as a mentor. it's a great contribution that you can make, one that really distinguishes veterans treatment courts from other treatment courts that exist.
Yeah, I would think that a veteran who is a mentor can be particularly credible to, the veterans who are dependents in your court.
Very much so.
Because I find that even though my service was 50 years ago, I can talk to our student veterans. We haven't had identical experiences, but we've had parallel experiences.
I hope you've read the article about Professor Holbrook and his military experience. It is fascinating and very enlightening, and you can see how he's able to make the contributions that he has, not only to the law school, but in private practice. And he's a premier dispute resolution individual that's benefited our legal community significantly. So thanks for what you've done on that.
Thanks, Joe. Another question? Anybody? No question? Oh, I'm sorry.
Judge Bass, you were one of the creators of the Veterans Court system here in Utah. What was the idea? Was this rooted out of your homeless court experience, or was this something
No,
else?
I'll give credit where credit is due there. Really, Paul Warner is the pioneer, and I thank Dr. Doyle for his kind words, but Paul is the one who really took hold of this idea. Paul's retired Army colonel, although he did Navy time as well. Came out of the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was telling Professor Holbrook, if you sent to central casting and said, send me over a judge, Paul's the guy you send. Tall, he's white-haired, he's regal, he's all that kind of stuff. He's easy to kill. So where did it come from? I had our current district attorney, Sim Gill, approach me about 10, 11 years ago with a representative of the Veterans Administration. I think it was Amy Earle at that time. Amy was VJO, and I think she'd gone into supervision up there. I don't remember. I know I worked a lot with Amy in the beginning, and Sim suggested to me that he would like to do a veterans court. He knew that I was a vet. He also knew that I was an outreachy judge. A lot of judges are not. A lot of judges are very insular. They apply a lot of the facts, make the decisions, and that's the end of it. There's a good justification for that. This kind of court is not for every judge. Okay. So Sim came to me and asked me if I would be interested in doing it. I said sure. And so we put the thing together, and so I credit both Paul and Sim and the VA for approaching Sim in the beginning for doing that. So the genesis of it was that spark. I had the homeless court going at that time, and although I knew I was seeing vets, I didn't know that I was seeing a number that would be great enough to support a veterans court. But it turns out that over time we've had sufficient numbers to be able to justify the judicial and staff resources. We've had roughly, I was going to try and check the numbers today, just ended up buried on a calendar, and I apologize, I should have done it ahead of time. But being a well-trained lawyer, I always wait for the last minute before doing anything. I knew I had a 12:15 deadline. I'm sorry, just ran out of time. But we've had 200 plus, maybe 220 individuals go through Veterans Court, and with a very small percentage, 4 or 5% of those not being successful in that court. That said, I'm not looking at felonies. If you were a vet and are eligible for our court and you've just got money issues in a traffic case, you can come into that court. I'll track you, and we'll give you credit for that. Royal, on the other hand, is dealing with an array of felonies, and having been a former mental health court defense attorney, I understand the array of felonies that he's dealing with, and the likelihood to engage in future criminal behavior associated with some of the thinking that goes with engaging in those felonies. So I don't tout a percentage rate as a success. That's just what it is. Yeah, not my idea. Glad I did it, and glad somebody thought that they could come to me and ask for me to do it.
Is there somebody that you see that, when you eventually retire, will step into your shoes and keep this going?
Yeah, we just hired him. He's the editor-in-chief of the law review up here with Judge Landau. The guy's whip smart. I mean, he just increased the overall IQ of the judges in our court by about 30 points the day we hired him. No, you've got that kind of approach. He number one, has the desire to engage in that kind of outreach, interaction, people who were troubled. And Judge Landau, when I saw Landau and I saw that he'd applied for a justice court job, I thought, Clem's got this wrong. I didn't know him, but I read a little bit about him. I think thought it said Justice Supreme Court. Because he came from not only that law review background, but had been working for years in probably the highest level appellate private firm here in the state. Just a really great mind. But no, when I talked to Clem, he said, no, when friends told me, you're throwing your career away. He said, there's not a day that goes by here that I don't see one or more unsolvable problems that I want to address. And I'm glad for that, because you need that level of engagement, the refusal to burn out, and the interest in continuing to engage in these gnarly problems year after year after year. Even if you don't solve the problem, at least you're addressing it, you're engaging. That guy is the guy that I encouraging, shall we say, to step into the veterans court role.
We have time, I think, for one more question. Nobody?
I have one, but I think it probably would be best offline. But I'm just really intrigued by the firearms and veterans and the diagnoses with that. I'm sure it's a really big question. Longtime VA employee, never heard about how they lose their weapons. Never really learned about any of that. I never saw anybody lose their access to that. So that's a really prevalent, I don't know, myth, but I don't know all the veterans in the world, obviously, either. So just kind of addressing that, I guess, kind of everybody. Where are we with that? Especially in the state of Utah, just because I'm new to Utah, too.
I can respond at a high level, and then it'll be twofold. So I would encourage you to read the article that the Utah Law Review will be publishing in our social justice issue, which is written by a former JAG attorney who is now a professor at Stetson University. I withdrew my article from publication submission when I saw her article come through, because I'm the editor of the social justice issue. I saw her article and felt that it was an important enough issue that I would like it to get some national traction. Not sure that mine would be good enough to be published. So her name is Stacy Simcox. If you'd like to contact Professor Holbrook or Nat or myself, I'd be happy once that article comes out to share it with anyone who's interested. But just at a high level, the background is in the 90s, a new piece of legislation was passed which required federal agencies to report to the NICS, which is the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, in addition to state agencies and mental health providers. When that rule was promulgated by the ATF promulgated a rule that said anyone who's reporting based on a mental incapacity standard has to send us their information to say how we're reporting. So the VA, wanting to comply with this new federal rule, said, well, this is what we're doing to determine mental capacity. We're determining it based on an individual's ability to contract and an individual's ability to manage their VA benefits. So when, for instance, a veteran comes to the VA and has had a traumatic brain injury or some other situation that puts them in front of a ratings representative, the ratings representative just goes through the paperwork in the typical manner that they normally would, determining whether someone needs a financial fiduciary or not. And when they make the determination that a fiduciary should be appointed, that individual is then reported to the NICS as someone who is incompetent to handle firearms.
And can I go back to what you said too, the
Sure.
contract?
Yeah, and my
Contract
research
for-
didn't focus on that as much, but the VA regulation specifically says one who because of injury or disease lacks the mental capacity to contract or manage his or her own affairs, including disbursement of funds without limitation.
I'm not
So-
sure what they're meaning by contract, but
I don't think that they're sure what they're meaning by contract either, because federal law requires that someone in that circumstance is adjudicated a mental defective by a court of competent jurisdiction. So these individuals are seeking help from the VA, and then they're being reported to the NICS as someone who should not legally be able to possess a firearm. And not knowing that, they then go to purchase a firearm or otherwise operate one and learn in that way that they've been reported. So
Through the
it's,
fiduciary process,
yes,
which is actually quite rare.
well,
The fiduciary, to get the fiduciary is quite rare.
and it may be rare.
Yeah.
What I can say is that my circle of veteran friends all believe
Right.
that if they go to the VA for help or to even initiate the benefits process, I can't even tell you how many of my husband's colleagues have not gone to the VA to initiate that process because they're afraid that they'll have their guns taken away.
Which is a very sad myth.
It is. It is a sad myth, and it is something that the VA should address. The Social Security Administration last year tried to pass a similar regulation that would have required the same inquiry into an individual's assignment of a fiduciary, and the Trump administration, which I know is a bad word sometimes, the Trump administration said, no, you can't do this, and the Social Security Administration has had to go back to the drawing board on whether or not they will report people to the NICS under the same, well, they can't under the same framework that the VA uses. The VA is the only federal agency that uses that framework.
Our time is up. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. Please join me in applauding our expert panel.
And there's more pizza, so please take pizza.
We'll see you in a week.
Yeah, you should definitely paper
It's